Greetings, everyone. My name is Ellen-Rae and I will be the moderator for Protecting the Public Good, a forum. I just wanted to share a little bit of the background of how this forum came to be. Back in the fall of 2020, a thriving university for thriving Hawaii called TUTH is a group of faculty, staff, and students that have been monitoring the academic reorganization and the budget cuts at the university. And so I was an APT worker in the law library, and I heard about the budget cuts and the furloughs and the reduction in force, the possible things that could come our way because of the pandemic affecting our state budget. And so I joined TOEF's conference calls to learn more about what was happening and what I could do to get involved. Meanwhile, I was also part of IKEA's conference calls, and that IKEA is facilitated by Local 5, and they were reporting to the broader community about how hotel workers were affected by the pandemic and how many have been laid off and dealing with the fear of losing their health insurance. And so while I was part of these calls, I started to see the connection between the hotel workers as well as public workers in the university and in K-12 education. And it is that our economy is set up to be dependent on external monies coming in through visitor dollars as well as investments. And so when the pandemic hit and tourism faltered, this affected people's jobs, as well as it diminished the amount of funding that goes into our public state coffers that funds public institutions such as K-12 education and the university. And so there's this concern about this external dependence and the way that our economy is configured in that way. As I was trying to find other panelists for this conversation, I ended up talking to my friend Aiko, who recommended that I look at the value of Hawaii 3, Hulihia, the Turning. And this book really kind of supported this idea that the current economic arrangement that we are in is not sustainable and that we should be looking for other ways to generate industry and an economy, but it's to be locally focused and to be environmentally resilient. And so from this book, I was also able to find organizations that were creating and have been creating alternative economic directions for Hawaii. And so this is how the different people came together for this conversation. So the agenda is to first engage in a conceptual framing of this talk, and then we'll go into discussions with organizations resisting job insecurity, with organizations creating alternative economic directions for Hawaii, and then input from our legislative ally, Amy Perusso, and then we'll have a second round of reflections and Q&A. So our request is that our panelists mute their mic if they're not speaking, and to try to stay within their 5-minute time, just because there are about 10 people speaking today. So I do have a bell that I will ring at 4 minutes and then at 5 minutes. And to also try to listen and take note of each other, because the point of this conversation is try to facilitate conversation across sectors in our society that don't often talk to each other, but at the same time, during this pandemic, we are very much being affected by same forces. And so the goal is to facilitate listening and dialogue. For the audience, please use the Q&A box to enter any questions, and also for our panelists to please keep your chat box open should we give you any messages about time or other type of internal conversations that we need to have. So to begin the framing of the conversation, the value of Hawaii 3 Hulihia, the Turning, has a chapter called Kuʻokoʻa by Dr. Noelani Goodyear Kaopua. And this chapter is important because it uses a metaphor of Hulihia, or which is a natural occurring thing when eruptions become so drastic that they make the landscape unrecognizable. So Hulihia has been spoken about in chants, and that Dr. Polani Kanakaole Kanahele has written about. And so, as I said, Hulihia and volcanic eruptions are naturally occurring. And so sometimes people think that when the eruptions cover the land and it makes everything barren, people feel it's apocalyptic or has ended things. But in reality, what Hulihia is about is the continuous cycle of the living Aina, or it's even a moment of renewal. Overturning the assumed normal makes way for new life. That even within a lava flow, that it's fertile for new life, new plants to grow. And so Noelani Gujira Ka'upua connects this to our political moment, where she says, nothing lives forever. Empires are not permanent fixtures. A time will come, like it or not, when U.S. empire recedes, crumbles, and transforms or collapses. And I think she's speaking a lot to what's going on with the United States, especially on January 6th, when we saw a mob of white supremacists storm the Capitol. And even that, besides that, it was also the exposure of the networks of white supremacists that were in our government and in different institutions, like in the police and in the military. And so a lot of this isn't new for many people of color, for Native people, for Black Americans, as well as for different migrants who have had to leave their country because of imperial war, U.S. imperial war. But at the same time, this mainstreaming of white supremacy, I think, is really what concerns people with the rise of Donald Trump's regime. And so, this particular formation is really questioning the legitimacy of American democracy. And so, could this be a kind of receding, crumbling, or transforming or collapsing of U.S. empire? And if that's the case, how is that going to affect us here in the middle of the Pacific? How do we react? So Noelani Gujira Ka'upua goes on to say that no matter how we feel about the U.S. occupation of Hawaii, or whether we celebrate or mourn the American empire's decline, the people of Hawaii must prepare to be more independent. Such preparation will be good for us regardless of our future relationships with foreign powers across the ocean. I just think that, this is a concept that we wanted to think about as we have our conversation, but also how, independence has been thought about in terms of political status. It has been thought about in terms of land back. But then Noelani Gujira Ka'upua kind of brings it down to ordinary concerns, such as the health of waters and lands, adapting to change away from fossil fuel addiction and addressing climate change, and also regularly discussing and debating how Hawaii could become an independent country again, and how this is a public conversation for everyone who resides here. And also, how can Hawaiian independence make ordinary people's lives better? What does it mean for low-paying service job workers in the tourism industry? What does it mean for UH students who want to apply their degrees to restore and maintain indigenous and local food systems? What does it mean for families who are dealing with substance abuse and houselessness? What does it mean for multilingual children and their families? Recording pop-up is interviewing with slideshow. Let's see. And also our kupuna. Let me see if I can just minimize it. I'll just go back to this screen. Can you guys just see the Hollywood squares now? Okay, yes. Let's just, sorry guys, I just, so with all that in the background and to frame the conversation, I wanted to now go now to the organizations. We'll go into introducing the speakers for the first theme, which are organizations resisting job insecurity. And so we have Professor Shankar from UH Manoa, and he's a facilitator for Thriving University for Thriving Hawaii. So we'll go in this order. And then we'll go to second is Kawaipuna Kalipi, who is an organizer for Academic Labor United. And then third, we'll go to Joshua Ioane Noga, who's a middle school teacher and a member of HSTA. And then fourth, we'll go to May Chang, who's an Ala Moana housekeeper and a member of Unite Here Local 5. And then we'll also go to Reverend Sam Domingo, who's an organizer for Hawaii Worker's Center. So I'll go back to the big squares now. And let's begin the conversation. Oh, the questions that you had was, how has the pandemic and economic downturn impacted workers in your institution and community? And what action has your organization taken to respond to job insecurities? So Shankar, you want to start? You're on mute.
Yes, I was muted and now I begin. Thanks, Ellen, for organizing this. Thanks for all your energy. It's thank you for bringing us together, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what others have to say. I'll be very quick and very brief, and then maybe we can expand on some other things. The first thing I want to say is that I really value this forum, because I think part of the work we need to do together is expand our idea of what the public good is, and for me, what that means is that it's a non-market idea about what is valuable, that everything cannot be reduced to the market, and everything cannot be produced for us and distributed for us by for-profit corporations. So I think we really need to push the idea that there are things, and maybe even the majority of things in our society that we value are public good in this more meaningful sense. I think there is an attempt by people that I don't necessarily agree with to take the idea of public good and make it, to water it down and dilute it. And I think part of what we should do is to resist that and have this much more expansive idea of public good, which takes it away from market forces, calls on the values of sustainability, calls on knowledges which are other than mainstream knowledges, like indigenous knowledges, which respects a variety of ways of knowing and being in the world, that is empowering for all of us. So to come to my own position within the university, I see three challenges during and after the pandemic. And the first one is an intensification of something which has been going on in the university for a while. And I'm speaking as part of the instructional faculty in the university. And that's the adjunctification of the university, the sort of, the doing away of tenured and tenure track faculty, and the increase in the lecturer pool. And also I want to acknowledge here the GAs as well, right? And I think there's a way to think of this as those who are on tenure track versus everybody else. I think we should resist doing that. I think, this is an issue which affects all of us. And when the working conditions for lecturers and for GAs are not good, I think that's bad for the university as a whole. And I think tenure track faculty should be really aware of that. But I think what's happening at an administrative level is that from a purely non-public good point of view, to have lecturers, to increase the adjunct pool is to make your workforce much more easily fireable and hireable. I think in the short term, what's going to happen, what I see happening is a contraction in the lecturer pool, because lecturer costs are easy to save. So during the pandemic, there's a contraction. But I make no mistake, I think this is going to expand once the pandemic is over at the cost of other kinds of permanent positions. So I think it's a kind of a complex situation, but I think it's important to understand exactly what's going on here. The second, I would say, is again an intensification, but especially dangerous, and I think especially difficult to wrap our heads around, and that's the rush to online technologies. I think online technologies are much more visible, and they are much more being used within the university. Effect on instructional, positions is a little unclear still, but I think this is something we'll have to track. I think there is already talk that I'm hearing about how even after the pandemic ends, that the university is going to move decisively towards more online teaching and more hybrid forms of teaching. And I don't want to dismiss all forms of online technologies. Some of them are very good and they can reach students and populations in the state which are not easily reachable in other ways. So I don't want to be reductive about this. But what it does for the workforce and job security is, I think, something worth thinking about. And maybe I'll have a few things to add to that. Attacks on tenure, I think, have been going on, and they're going to intensify and continue in the future. You might have heard that there was a little bit of a discussion about this apparently at the Board of Regents meeting last week that I couldn't go to. And so I think the number of tenured faculty, part of the instructional labor pool, has shrunk enormously since the time that I left graduate school about 25 years ago and joined the university. I think it was about 60% at that time, 60 to 70%. I believe it's like 30 to 40% now. I think here again, and this is going to require imagination on everybody's parts, including, and maybe most importantly, those who are lucky enough to be on tenure track positions, is to really kind of come at this in ways which don't pit one group of instructional workers against others. And I think it's really important to recognize that the way I think of it for myself is that the benefits of tenure, which are about academic freedom, but also about job security, is something that should be for all workers. It shouldn't be just for one group of workers. It should be for everybody. I mean, that's one of the things that unions do. So that's the way I think about it, and to sort of not come at this but I do think that, there's something going on with the instructional pool here. The last thing I'll say, I'm not sure what my time is, but part of the question is, what have we done in TUT? In TUT, we have really focused, especially in the fall, when there was a lot of moving parts and the conversation was very muddled. I think things have clarified a little bit, but maybe not enough. What we did a lot is to have a media campaign. We went on radio, we wrote op-eds in the newspapers, really kind of pushing an idea of public good and asking for greater accountability and transparency within the university. That's one thing that we did. We have provided testimony on a very regular basis at the Board of Regents. And I think one of the most important things that we've done, in my opinion, is behind the scenes in being a clearinghouse for conversations among different sectors of the university, in different colleges and different departments, and not just faculty, but also APT and lecturers, Ellen, and many other people in the UH Press. So I think we meet once in 2 weeks approximately, and if nothing else happens, we learn what's going on elsewhere. People say, this is happening in my department, this is going on here, and it helps us to kind of make our understanding of to get a better grasp of the whole picture, because knowledge is power, and admin is in this position of always collecting and analyzing, and we need to do that too. I think I'm probably 5 minutes. Yes, Ellen?
Yes, thank you very much, Shankar. Great. So Kavaipuna?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Ellen, for organizing this. It's a great forum, and I'm really stoked to be a part of it. And yeah, Shankar, thanks for making that connection between the hiring of tenure faculty and instructional positions. We've seen similar things at Ulu happening, and the pandemic and the economic downturn has affected workers to different degrees here at Manoa, as you've mentioned, between the faculty and instructors. And we see that in the student workers pool as well. So in the onset of the pandemic in Hawaii, UH Manoa was relatively behind on responding to workers' needs. And this is in particular to undergraduate student workers, who many of them, when everything went online, weren't given hours. So that means their income went from maybe 15 to 20 hours a week to 0. And that was only remedied maybe a month or two after the initial lockdown. So that's almost 2 months of 0 income for student workers. RAs were put in super precarious positions. They were given the option to move out of the dorms or work overtime because other RAs had left, and they weren't given that much supplies like to protect themselves or cleaning supplies to keep the area sanitized. So now we're talking about not just like not having enough money, but not being safe. And this is just the undergraduate student workers. For the graduate student workers, we're still not given sick leave. So it's on the responsibility of the graduate students to have to find somebody to cover them or to ask the professor to cover them. And a lot of graduate student workers that work in labs are still required to go in person, even when our cases were as high as 300 a day. So you have the no sick leave for GAs, being forced to work in person. And on top of that, the larger Hawaii, right, there was a bunch of people that lost jobs in the service industry, and UH Manoa does not pay the graduate student workers a living wage. So many graduate student workers have second and sometimes third job on top of having to raise a family or on top of having to malama their kupuna. So you're seeing a loss of income and an over-reliance on UH Manoa to be their sole source of income when it's not enough. So student workers that were either undergraduates or graduate student workers really suffered during this time. At Ulu, we've tried our best to respond to these needs. So almost maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown, we noticed that people were reaching out to us saying that you know, they couldn't afford their rent, or we're just noticing it even amongst our members that this was a really difficult time for students, student workers, and just everybody at UH. So Ulu opened up a hardship fund, and it was mutual aid based. So if a student had an extra $20, you would turn it in, and then other students could apply to get this hardship fund. And it was just a quick Google form. We weren't trying to make it difficult on anyone, more difficult on anyone to get these funds. And we would distribute the funds based off of criteria. We also continue to pressure the university to give student workers sick leave, not just the graduate student workers, but our undergraduate student workers as well. And most recently, we sent out a survey to gauge where student workers need support. And that's to say that the results that we had from the survey are very, very heartbreaking. And yeah, things just need to change. Shankar, I loved your suggestions, and I'm excited to dig more into those later. Okay, I'll give up my time.
Thank you. Joshua?
Aloha aina kākou.
Aloha.
Aloha. O Joshua i wana nonga koe inoa o haula mai au ahupua kalua nui kali uwaa moku o ko o lauloa moku puni o ahu kakui hewa. Kauhana kaulia me kauhana mahilona kau minonga whangasa whalesu Samoa. Aloha, and mahalo to our panelists that have spoke so far. Everyone, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Joshua Nonga. I am a middle school teacher at Hakipu Academy, and I am a proud member of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. I'm a member of the Government Relations Committee for the Windward chapter, but I do not come and sit here in that capacity. More so, I come as a fellow worker, and I want to first mahalo our hosts and for our organizers for calling us out to talk something very important. Talks about the future. I just want to real quickly build upon what Dr. Shankar said about the expansion of the workforce, and I think that ties in with what also Kawaipuna shared about the loss of labor and loss of the funds, which we're all workers. We all rely on these funds for us to survive. I think what we're seeing right now is kind of the gathering of a storm that sees a right to work with Citizens United, all of these things that really are deterrent to workers, right? And forced to now make us temporary workers, where the corporations will see a larger amount of a workforce temporarily, like you said, but then that's to the loss of the different types of labor that are required, including a professional. Just in my capacity, the teaching professional, right? Those of us who've gone to school to give back and become kumus, become primary and secondary teachers in our Hawaii public schools. I'm happy to talk to you on Tuesday, which educators across America, and here in solidarity, we wear red to support Red for Ed, fully funded public education, right? And there's many studies that talk about the equity of funding public education and how that is can only be positive for everyone and everyone's society. And now we're looked at when there's inequity within education in combination with the pandemic, and we see that those are the most vulnerable, our school children, our kupuna, our families. And so taking a look at, the questions, how the pandemic and the economic downturn has impacted within HSTA first, see our teachers, first to look at our students. It has completely changed what going to school looks like. Now our students and our teachers are gathered here online, distance learning, or a hybrid, right? And even when we're face to face, it comes to where we have plexiglass for our safety, we're wearing masks, wearing these face shields, and all teachers know that the biggest factor besides parents in student learning is the relationship between teachers and students, right? And so that has also been pointed out with the further highlighted the inequities in our system. And so now we look at teachers. Many of our members are, many of our members are struggling, forced to work 2 jobs, just like many of us here. And that deteriorates the quality of education that our students receive. I am a proud HSTA member, and just that what action has our organization taken to respond in job insecurities? Friends, we've, as teachers, taken a lot of action and will continue to take action. Our organization just had a press conference today talking about the CARES Act funding and how we are going to push Governor Ige to make sure that they continue to fund education prior to COVID. Mahalo, everyone, and I look forward to listening and learning more. Aloha.
Mahalo. Okay. May, are you ready?
Yes, hi everyone, aloha. Let me introduce myself first. My name is May Chang. I'm 52 years old. I migrated from the Philippines. I work at the ʻAuamo Hotel for like 4 years now. It would have been 4 years if not with the furlough. And I'm a housekeeper, and unfortunately furloughed for since March. So many businesses, including tourism industry, face the coronavirus outbreak impact, and then the economic downturn caused by the unprecedented pandemic persuaded most employers to inevitably furlough or permanently laid off employees. But before the pandemic, ʻAuamo Hotel was at its peak. Occupancy was dramatically overwhelming till the last quarter of 2019, up to March 2020. This was when the numerous Japanese visitors came in particular, and filled up our hotel and put every single worker to work and that is good, to the lowest seniority, enabling us to complete 40 hours or more, when it's really busy. So we have to stay for overtime, and up until tourism faltered. So, Ala Moana Hotel has been operational amidst the community lockdown. It was during this time that the company had the opportunity to major renovations at the hotel as well. Thus, workers were further curtailed. As a result, many of us became jobless and were laid off. Furthermore, with the prolonged impact of the pandemic, we lost all accrued benefits: health insurance, sick leave, vacation leave, and then most of us also struggle to balance the budget, financial constraints, and then and most of all, we also experience emotional and mental toll to workers and their family. We're all worried of this, and based on my experience, I went through several challenging experiences in situations like I wanted to go to the doctor, but I can't go to physically to my doctor because my insurance will not cover the cost of my visit during the lockdown. And I have, migraines and several illnesses that I could say, but I can't go physically to the doctor. So that's one of the challenges that I experienced during the lockdown, during this pandemic as well. And then, and I'm also worried that my husband, as an essential worker, has to go to work, you know, and knowing his age, his age, and he's prone to illness, and then he is obliged to go to work because he's the only person that can work in the family, and he is the only one that has the capability to put food on the table, because during those time I was amongst the claimants for UI to experience delay. I haven't got my UI insurance up until I think late May already. So so there's a way for me to help my husband financially. And then I was so grateful that Local 5 became the wind beneath our wings in every non-union hotel and non-union hotel workers. They were a big help to us. Um, the union actually organized regular updates for us through text messages, inform us about the COVID, giving us more news, that we wanted to be updated in everything. And then they also help us with our unemployment insurance assistance, which I waited for, like I said, the 2.5 months. And then we also did weekly statewide safety meeting through Zoom, making sure that all members are updated and informed about what's going on. And then we also pushing for health and safety protocols for the hotels. We go training, PPE, new cleaning standards, and so much more that we needed to do. And then they also local union also extended our medical coverages like health insurance, um, medical when we exhausted our bank hours from our hotel, from our job. And Local 5 helped introduce a bill called Bill 80, requiring daily room cleaning and putting hospitality workers who initially lost their jobs back to work. The bill is not only about union members but all hotel workers. This bill has not been passed. It would be great if the legislators paid full attention to it. This bill can be a perfect in promoting safety measures to the guests as well as the workers. Daily room cleaning will help eliminate virus through high-touch areas and surfaces in the hotel by means of thorough cleaning, consistent wiping, sanitizing, or just general cleaning. And more than management will have to schedule more workers so that guests will have the confidence to stay in their rooms and in their hotel. I personally wanted to pass this bill because I am still out of job. I have nothing in my bank hours to use. My husband hold his retirement plans this year because once he retired, my medical insurance under him will lapse as well. You know, it's hard during this pandemic. It's hard to not have medical insurance. And
Thank you, May. Thank you. Okay, Reverend Sam Domingo.
Yes, aloha everybody. May, certainly your story is really heartbreaking. I am a retired United Methodist pastor who served most of my parish ministry here in Hawaii. But I've been involved in community groups and work and such, has worked with a lot of folks that I know. Amy's one of those who serves with me on KAHEA with the Local 5 folks. So I've been with Local 5 support for over 20 years as well. But I've just joined, if you will, the Hawaii Workerʻs Center. We launched back in May of last year after gathering together as a sponsoring committee of people who were interested in really helping low-wage workers, especially non-union folks. And we launched our group back in May and have been slowly recruiting alliances and making friendships across the working universe, if you will, especially with low-wage workers. And especially when the pandemic hit, one of the things we jumped into quickly is to see what kind of support these folks have had, especially with their unemployment claims. And that has been pretty much part of our long-term, if you will, short-term life right now, and what we've been doing in really trying to call attention to the really challenging way in which our Department of Labor has responded, or if you will, not responded to the claims of a lot of our workers. I mean, tens of thousands of workers are still waiting to be adjudicated to know whether they have, a claim coming to them or not. And May, you're one of them. And it's really despicable in the sense that we've tried to meet with Ann Pereira, we've tried to contact the governor's office, we've tried so many ways even to contact our local representatives and senators to see what else we could do to really get any kind of response and word back from these folks. And, it's really surprising and disappointing that in some sense, they have taken advantage of this time of COVID that we can meet face to face. So when we make any kind of requests to meet, they can put us off easily. And this is what we've been hearing in other sectors, as we've had an IKEA meeting the other day in which, we've again tried to talk to the administration. We've tried to talk to members who hold chairmanships of various committees in both the House and in the Senate, and have been basically just, blown off. And this is really heartbreaking in a way, to think that, these are the folks, indeed, who are our elected officials who should now be really stepping up to have that kind of response to the people who are hurting the most. How long can we go? And we know that COVID is not going to be taken care of until most of us are vaccinated, and that's going to be sometime in the fall of this coming year at best. So we're just being hung out to dry. And the kinds of things that we've been trying to do through the Hawaii Workerʻs Center is clearly trying to reach out. Luckily, we have been able at least also to get some kind of funding from a charitable resource to begin to at least handing out some kind of assistance money to these folks that we have been meeting in the lines that have been gathering at churches and in the food distribution areas, as we have also been interviewing them and getting their stories so that we can continue to mount pressure on the people who can indeed help the most. And so we continue to do this, and we're hoping to get more allies. We're trying to see what we can do to get an in, if you will, to see whether somebody at the executive level, the governor's office, will respond, and somebody at the legislator level, especially with the leadership, especially for Speaker of the House Psyche, as well as President Ron Kuchi, to come out and say something that will add a little bit more pressure so that our people will get some kind of relief.
Thank you, Reverend. Okay. So the next group of people that we want to ask now is to the organizations that have been creating alternative economic directions for Hawaii. And so the order that we want to go in is Logan Narikawa, who's a board member of KAHEA. And then we'll go to Keahi Selhorse, who is a member, program director of the Hiapo program of Purple Maiʻa. And then he will be joined by Kelsey Amos, who's also a co-director or co-founder of Purple Maiʻa. And then we'll have Nigel Rosette talk as a planner of Kuaʻāina Ulu ʻAuamo. And then following him, we'll end with Amy Amy Perusso from the state capitol to end our first round. So Logan, the questions, what has your organization been creating as an alternative to, sorry, let me look at my questions here. What has your organization been creating to develop alternative economic directions for Hawaii to address current and prevent future insecurities? What can your organization recommend about preparing and rebuilding ourselves into a more locally adaptive and environmentally resilient society? Go ahead, Logan.
Thank you. Aloha, everybody. And thank you to Ellen, Shankar, and Cynthia for organizing us. I'm really honored to be included on this panel with all these amazing organizers and community members. Yeah, I think trying to create a thriving Hawaii, even in the midst of a pandemic, really important conversation. So thank you. I think there's a kind of fortuitous way that I was placed in between the two panels, because KAHEA's work has been going on for 20 years. And in those 20 years, it's found itself kind of shifting and adapting to a changing kind of landscape in Hawaii. I've been fortunate enough to be part of its board for about 4 years now. And the work that we do today is mostly associated with the movement to protect Mauna Kea. But kind of historically, what we've done is to bring together those who are interested in environmental justice and those who are interested in advocating for traditional Hawaiian rights. And specifically where this usually takes place are before rather arcane bodies of kind of administrative networks and the legal system in Hawaii, and sort of tracking public processes that aren't often visible or kind of announced to the general public. And our understanding is this is by design. This is a way to alienate the kind of interests of everyday people, to create small gatherings of interested parties, usually who are aligned with development, to create projects that create money for generally corporate interests over the interests of everyday workers and the people of Hawaii. So what we do is to track these things as they make their way through different stages, and to try and bring community to these gatherings, or at the very least, be the ones who are there to broadcast to a larger audience what's going on and to make sure that people know what's happening. I think one of the legacies of KAHEA, though, has been to take these as opportunities to create alternatives or to provide kind of the possibility of alternatives, as in Mauna Kea, where we were kind of part of a contested case hearing, which is one of those kind of arcane legal processes in Hawaii that have to do with the protection of the environment when a development interest comes up that perhaps hasn't dotted all of its I's or crossed its T's. But then, you know, several iterations after this contested case hearing of this movement is a large, you know, groundswell of, you know, kind of people's movement that includes people who are following the legal processes, but includes people who are generally interested in defending Aina in Hawaii. So it's not to say that we're taking credit for the movement, but that this represents one part of this, you know, groundswell of public opinion that leads to this this rising up of everyday people. So at its best, I think that is what KAHEA does. Kind of written in the name is this idea of the call. And it strikes me, you know, when you're standing or usually sitting in a really cold room in front of a microphone and there are really important people, Amy is probably kind of used to being on both sides of this, that you often feel like uttering a simple truth becomes like a really radical act of courage, like saying something like, you know, the capitalist system as it's currently configured is destroying our environment and is denying basic, you know, rights to everyday people, or the government in Hawaii is currently, you know, the de facto government is the inheritor of the overthrow of 128 years ago, and it continues like in its illegitimacy to decide what's going to happen for all of Hawaii's people, kind of, you know, against our will. But after we declare those kind of simple truths, we remind ourselves, like at KAHEA at least, that it's still important to show up, because de facto means like still by fact, like they are in charge, they get to have say over what happens. And if we do not show up, like things still happen against our will. So kind of balancing those two perspectives is what we try to do.
Thank you, Logan. So Keahi or Kelsey?
Yeah, I'll get it started. Thanks for having us. We're super excited to be talking with all of you. So I'm a co-founder of Purple Maiʻa Foundation. Keahi's with me. He's the lead of one of our programs called the ʻAuamo program, which he'll talk about shortly. Purple Maiʻa started in 2013. Our mission is to educate and empower the next generation of culturally grounded, community-serving technology makers and problem solvers, which is a very ambitious and sort of positive statement. Really, the original idea was, let's start coding classes for kids because there aren't enough coding classes, coding and computer science, in our school system. But we asked ourselves early on, you know, part of the ambition of teaching kids technological skills, setting them up for what's often called 21st century jobs and 21st century skills, these kind of knowledge economy skills. The hope is that they'll be able to access kind of better paying jobs with better benefits and be able to sort of bypass a lot of the injustices that we're hearing about from some of the other speakers in other industries. Of course, technology isn't perfect either as an industry, but that's the hope, right? What are we preparing students to enter if we're providing them with a certain education? And so I think Purple Maiʻa has also always been about building up a local tech industry that functions on values that are different from Silicon Valley's values that are based in Hawaii. And how can that industry be an alternative to tourism and defense spending and kind of government spending that we're reliant on? And so this is something we've been thinking about for a while, and it does seem kind of pie in the sky until now. You know, COVID has happened, and I think people are taking more seriously the idea of figuring out like what are some alternative industries we can be investing in and training people for that take us off of this kind of precarious dependence. And so we have been able to our answer to that is not perfect, but we have a training program that got some funding, and that in this context, we didn't foresee that this would be the context, but that's kind of more important than ever to be thinking about how can we, because I think that the thing that worries me, or that I feel like we have to guard against, is it's, in fixing the economy, right, in order to make life better for people. I think, whose economy is that for, right? Like we can bring in industry and have more money circulating and flowing, but who actually gets those jobs? Who gets to benefit from whatever new direction we might pursue? And so for us, we're committed to Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and low-income people being able to work in the tech industry locally or anywhere. And that is kind of what shapes our ʻAuamo program, which I'll stop now and let Keahi talk about that, whatever time's left.
Thank you. Yeah, so, some of the questions we ask: how do we keep talent here? How do we make life better for working families? And what's the greatest impact that we could possibly make as this small organization? And so for us, we are focused on increasing incomes in the household. And we think we can do that through entry-level tech jobs, right? So the ʻAuamo program, it's an adult workforce program that we launched in earnest in October. It's basically three main parts, right? So always thinking about household incomes as the end result, we move backwards from there. So before they could get a job, we have a paid apprenticeship program within our organization where we continue training and work on our certifications and build the skills that employers are looking for. And then before that, there's more of a 12-week intensive education and training program. It's the tools that we think are important today. One of those tools is Salesforce, which is a customer relationship management tool. If you've never heard of it, it's not a big deal, but many large corporations and organizations use it. And there is a demand in Hawaii today. And then even before that, right, what we're focusing on now is digital literacy, right? Getting familiar with the tools so they can then step into the next part of this program. And so, achieving your certification, it's an international recognized certification. They gain experience through the project work, and then we help them connect with potential employers. So all of our students go through these different stages in our training program. Their knowledge and expertise becomes more focused and specialized to that particular platform or software stack to help them differentiate themselves in the marketplace. Right now that's Salesforce, but it could be something very different, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now. Increasingly and interestingly, the employers that we speak to today are less focused on those specific tech skills and are much more welcoming to the softer skills, right? So knowing how to collaborate, business processes, culture fits, right? That's what they're more interested in, is what they tell us. Obviously, knowing the technology is a huge plus, but being able to work in today's environment is even more important. So again, yeah, our grants, we just got funded recently. It's a 3-year program. We do focus on the Native Hawaiian community, as Kelsey said, but we accept all, right? So when we say we want to increase incomes through all islands and all households, yes, we reach out to Native Hawaiian communities, Pacific Islanders and so forth, but we think that we should lift everyone at the same time. So we encourage you guys all to apply at our website, and we can drop that in the chat later. For us, technology is the great equalizer. And so no, it's not the solution, but it is a tool to help us find a solution, right? It's a pathway to move forward. And so, yeah, we're just doing our part to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Keahi. Thank you, Kelsey. So next, Nigel.
Mahalo. Aloha mai kako. My name is Nigel Rosette. I'm from Maui and I live in Wahiawa right now. I work for a nonprofit called Kuaʻāina Ulu ʻAuamo, where acronym KUA is an ode to the backcountry folks who continue to malama Hawaii. Now we work to serve people across the state as a backbone organization for 3 major networks. mostly Native Hawaiian communities, practitioners, and leaders from across the state. Our founding network, ʻAuamo, led by Alex Conley, consists of fishers and farmers. The Hui Malama Lokoi'a, led by Brenda Assumption, is a network of fish pond kia'i, or guardians, who manage traditional native fish ponds across the state. And our newest and maybe most kupuna network that we have is the Limu Hui, which consists of Limu practitioners or algae experts, a lot of which are kupuna, right? All these networks are transgenerationally networked. So we try to encourage interactions between all the age groups. But with COVID, you know, we had to pivot. So now we're getting folks, our kupuna online, making sure they're not left behind, getting our young guys to try and teach them, just trying to find out ways to connect everybody and network, right? Within our name is this concept or this word ʻAuamo, which refers to leverage or shouldering the burden. The idea being that we come together to support these networks in addressing how we might shoulder the burden of propelling our people and our ecosystems into aina momona, or abundant landscapes. And together it's over 70 plus individuals and communities across the Pai'aina, right? And we support by providing network building, strategic support, and facilitating advocacy, you know? So the conversation around developing alternative economic directions for Hawaii has been a topic for us for a while. You know, how can we keep the people of the place in the place? And not every time is it the economic, how do you say that? Money isn't always the thing, right? A lot of our work is driven by food security. Aina momona, how do we get food to be able to support ourselves in case stuff hits the fan? Example of this type of work is CBSFA's community-based subsistence fishing areas, which is a process that the state can approve a set of rules created by a community to better manage their resources. So in 2008, Ha'ena and Kauai, Mo'omomi, and Miloli'i were all identified as potential sites. To date, only Ha'ena was given that jurisdiction, or that rule package passed for them. And within a couple years, they're seeing more fish come back. And not only the fish and that food security, but the people of the place are coming around, and they're touching the kalo. They're holding everybody responsible for the well-being of that place. They're starting to care, essentially, right? So that's kind of the work that we push. Well, I only have a minute left. So with that, our work is trying to support these folks, right? And so different types of jobs around food security, help for farmers. I mean, I met Josh at Ka'anohi Farm at Anthony's Place, pulling weeds. I didn't even know he was a teacher. But we make connections, and these spaces in our communities are there to really transform the way people interact with each other and care for each other. I guess economic futures wise, the government can help in those spaces. You know, Anthony, for instance, he would rely on a core set of volunteers. And now if he can't have volunteers, he's faced to manage the whole 2-3 acres by himself. And that's the same story with many other folks. Yeah, that's all I share for now. I don't want to go over, but mahalo.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, just wanted to announce too, before we go to Amy, is to please ask any questions, audience, in the Q&A box. And so we also have a question from Kim too, so that's okay, Kim. But we also have the Q&A box is another place to ask questions, audience members. Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Aloha, my kako. I also want to echo the sentiments of other participants in just embracing this moment. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to have this discussion with these people. It's really important. And the question that was posed to me as a member of the legislature is, you know, in this moment, what evidence do you see at the legislature of support for a just transition and for legislation that provides for you know, movement to environmentally sustainable or greening of the economy and kind of towards a more culturally appropriate economic system. And I have to say that it's still early. So this is the 19th. The bills need to be submitted by the 27th. So the landscape is not really clear. It's a little hazy. And I will say that I have heard conversations at the Capitol, and that even over the course of the pandemic, I'm sure many of you watched the hearings of the House subcommittee and the Senate subcommittees on COVID. And the approach that's being taken by leadership in both of the houses towards this economic disaster and the public health disaster. And I think that trend continues as we enter into session. I think that while there's talk about economic diversification, the legislation that I've seen thus far, I have seen no bills to support green jobs. I think, or anything like that. I think that people are thinking about it, but it hasn't really evidenced itself in legislation yet. And I think that's because we are prohibited really from submitting any legislative proposals that require funding. Because of our economic crisis, we are $1.8 billion in the hole. And I know that for me, as a former public worker, a state teacher, I am concerned and have been really focused on mitigating the effects of the economic crisis on public workers. I think that the approach to this crisis, if we use austerity measures like furloughs and layoffs, will just drive us deeper into economic despair. I think $1.8 billion, when you look at the governor's budget, for example, I mean, many times reading that budget, I cried. And it's just because it tells a story of how devastating this is going to be for so many families. So my efforts right now, and I know I share this with some of my other colleagues, are really around forestalling that kind of collapse. I see it as the beginning of a collapse if those furloughs and layoffs are to happen. So I'm really working on revenue generators, on using this moment not just to use taxation to incentivize those things we want and disincentivize those things that we don't want, including inequality, but also just to give us a moment, give us some space to breathe so that we can be creating these futures. And I really think that the transitions that you folks are talking about in your organizational work and in the communities, that's going to be the source of change. I think it would be a mistake to look to the legislature for a top-down approach that is going to look at this in a systemic fashion and is going to be embraced by leadership, right? That is, in my view, like, that's just not a realistic expectation. So I want us to prepare to be thinking about how we are making change from below and then bringing into the conversations in the building, and to recognize opportunities that happen in the legislative session and to be able to seize on those opportunities for conversation and for change, but to not expect it to be handed to us, because I think that we are the source of the change. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So Cynthia, do you want to take the second round or should, yep. Okay.
Sure. So I'm just would direct the panelists to, there's two really excellent questions in the chat box. And Shankar has also asked another really good question in the chat. And so what Ellen and I thought would we do is just give you a chance to respond to each other, or to pick up the questions that are in the Q&A. So we'll just open up some time to do that, and hope that that way we address the questions, and that you also have a chance to, to just respond to points that you each have made. So I'm going to look into the chat box that is open to the panelists, and if you don't mind, just writing stack when you're ready to go, and that way I can call on you and we can just proceed that way. So if anyone's ready to kick us off, that would be excellent. And if not, I'll put somebody on the spot. Okay, it looks like Shankar, go for it.
Just because when I'm a teacher, I hate that dead silence, so, but I'm really looking forward to what my fellow panelists have to say. And I saw that one of the questions kind of picked up on my question, which I dropped in the chat box because I couldn't find a way to put it on the Q&A. And that really had to do with universal healthcare. And it just occurred to me, listening to everybody, listening to Mary, listening to some of the what others were saying, is that on the one hand, having universal healthcare is an incredible benefit for those who have insecurity in employment. But the economic argument, which can also be made, is that it actually would, in a state like Hawaii, it might or might not be expensive, but it would drive economic innovation, because we know that when you don't have to worry about healthcare, you might leave one job to try and start up something else. There is this kind of indirect benefit. So I feel like the argument can be made that in a state like Hawaii, if we are serious about getting away from tourism, then maybe universal healthcare is an important goal to strive for, because it'll open up all the imagination and creative power of the people living within the state. So that just occurred to me as being one overarching kind of a goal.
Thank you, Shankar. Does anybody else want to weigh in? I want to read a question here from Kim Kompak about what folks think about the movement to defund the police or military and refund human needs or green economy. Do you think the COVID epidemic has made it more urgent to ordinary people that big change has to happen with budget priorities? And so it looks like Puna is ready to speak to either that or other things too. So thanks, Puna.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at Kim's question. So I think a lot of the time we like to think of what happened in 2020 as siloed from everything that happened, but a lot of the consciousness around wanting to defund the police, defund the military, and putting services back into social services, or putting money back into social services, comes from the Black Lives Matter movement. And that should really be acknowledged, that this raising of consciousness was a collective effort of people around the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom to say that the current structure that we're in now is not conducive to a thriving society. It continues to fail us. And sorry, let me go back to the question. And I think the COVID pandemic kind of just highlighted all of the inequities that already existed. And now we're seeing that the police spent, what was it, $150K on a robot dog that takes the temperature of people and left so many people houseless. The mayor gave face masks to tourists while giving citations to locals. It's just the audacity of how the state is trying to demonize locals and like just give our resources away to tourism and tourists. So I think it's heavily connected. Everything that's happened in 2020 can't be separated from one another. So BLM, COVID, the casino for DHHL, it's all connected, and it's all in cahoots with capitalism. So we got to take a better look at all of that.
Thank you, Pina. Amy.
I just wanted to say, just so that folks don't think that everything is extraordinarily grim at the legislature, we do have some new members who are raising these questions about this connection between the hypermilitarization and our economic system and really challenging them. I think Representative Ganadin is one of them. I think Rep. Capella is another one. And I think that in their roles as vice chair, like they're going to be raising these questions and calling for change. I wanted to say, though, that these are going to be very complicated discussions at the legislature where everybody is going to want to claim the mantle of being the source of food sustainability or appropriate land use. I'm already starting to hear that rhetoric because there are conflicts. Should we use our land for green energy, or should we use it for farming? And which land should we use for which? And then should we be allowing cattle to graze on conservation land? Are those cattle going to be used to feed Kuaʻāina? Like, is that a legitimate claim that we should not be so concerned about native species and protecting them? So I think that these conversations that are during the session are going to be more complicated than I've ever seen. And I really think it's important that folks in this room and in this setting really insert themselves, because you can change the narrative, you can change the questions being asked just by being there.
I'm going to thank you, Amy. And this actually makes me think that it's a good lead in to John Witek's question. And so I'm just going to read that out and then hope that one or more of you might want to speak to that question, which is, how can individuals and groups represented on the panel converge or combine efforts to push the legislature to provide relief to workers and unemployed individuals and their families, and to act to create a green economy free of dependence on tourism? And how can we get Hawaii to set up a single, this was the medical insurance system for increasing a number of persons who are losing health insurance coverage? So I think this speaks to how do you all are assembled here together. Are there ways to kind of think about how different groups might work together effectively? So I don't know if anybody, oh good, Logan, looks like you're ready to kick that off.
Thanks for joining us, John. And thank you for the question. Part of the reason why I accepted so readily to be here is because I saw him invited in some of the earlier emails when all of this was being organized and put together. I'm thinking of two things. Ellen, in her opening, kind of dropped in the phrase that our society today might be another instance of the chickens coming home to roost, and kind of recalling, even though it was just Martin Luther King Day, I guess these two are always intertwined, but recalling the words of Malcolm X, when President Kennedy was assassinated, and thinking that white supremacy often like manifests itself like in waves, and most times it's the most vulnerable who are sort of reminding the larger society that when those more prominent acts like become public, that it had been an ongoing kind of quality that like just manifests itself in everyday life. I'm thinking about how the pandemic gives us the opportunity to see contradictions that always existed, but perhaps in more stark relief. And then I guess one thing is we get to have a panel like this. And so I'm thinking about how KAHEA's work tries to protect something so that an organization like KUA can more fully articulate what does Aina Momona look like in practice? What should we be doing with whatever lands are under assault by development? What is the alternative? What does it look like when a community in Kauai can come together and talk about sustainable fishing, and what does sustainable agriculture look like actually in practice when we bring in the best of kind of the knowledge cultivated by generations by Hawaiians. So my kind of simple answer to John's question is like, I want to talk more with the people that we've been paired with on this panel. How can our work be always in conversation with each other? How can we be intentionally like kind of looking to what other people are doing? I think there's a tendency even in community organizing to be siloed, and so I do want like my work to be in communication with all of yours, and in the same way that even if we don't kind of necessarily think about the movement for Black lives like at KAHEA, like that should still be something that informs our kind of idea of equity and justice. So yeah, let's be in conversation, please.
Thank you, Logan. And Kelsey, I'm gonna ask you to go next.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to sort of echo comments that I see value in. I mean, I think being in conversation is super important. I love how this event has broken down, not barriers, I guess, but, just to be connecting with all of you. And another thought is just to confirm about, the universal health care or some system like that. From my perspective as somebody working in a nonprofit that's trying to create startups and do all these kinds of entrepreneurial things that are kind of risky for workers, I encounter that definitely. There's people that I would like to come and be teachers and teach kids coding who are themselves a Native Hawaiian programmer, for example, but he'd rather stay with his job for a health insurance company that, can offer, at least at that time, right, can offer more job security for his family of 3 kids, right? So there's definitely ways that greater protections for workers, greater resources available to them from government and from the public side of things would, I think, definitely be able to spur what we personally do, and I can only imagine that would apply in other areas.
Please do, thank you, Kelsey. And please do, if you're in the audience, drop questions into the Q&A, or if you, oh, okay, Puna, excellent. Why don't you go next?
Sorry, I was inspired by Logan and Kelsey, so I just wanted to add in the responsibility to create a greener Hawaii shouldn't just be in the hands of the legislatures or the farmers or the fishermen. It's really like a lot of it. My family farms. I'm from a farming family, so a lot of it comes from the pallets and the or at least for those that like try to like live sustainably and fish and farm, and that's how they survive. It's based off of the pallets of the people. So I can grow 100 ulu trees and feed all of, I'm from Molokai, and feed all of Molokai, but if the people won't eat the ulu, then it's all going to be poho, it's all going to be wasted. Same thing for every single crop that we have in Hawaii. And some crops are seasonal. You shouldn't be eating tomatoes all year round. You shouldn't be eating XYZ all year round because they're seasonal and you want to rotate your crops. So we can't just rely on farmers to grow the foods that we're now used to. We ourselves have to also change our palates. So stop eating poke bowls every day from Foodland and start eating reef fish that are more sustainable. So this is a larger effort than just what the farmers and the fishermen can do. We ourselves have to change the way we see food. Instead of picking up the tomatoes from, I don't know, out of season tomatoes from Mexico, just pick up something that's local, that's in season and cheaper. So there are options and there are solutions that we can all take part in, but we have to be conscious of them. And it's a daily choice. And sometimes it's not a choice economically, but if you have the means to change your lifestyle to a more sustainable one, then that would also help out the local farmers that are trying to grow green, the local fishermen that are trying to fish sustainably, etc.
Thank you, Puna. And Reverend San Domingo, I'm sorry, I somebody just messaged me, you had your hand up, and I missed that. I was looking at the chat box, so please, I apologize, and please go next.
Yeah, I was going to say I really appreciate the way we were all invited. I mean, because as I look at the screen, I've not met much of you. I've known only Amy and with May, and so it's really an opportunity to make these kinds of connections and to see what we can do to really create a larger movement that is not just siloed from each other, because we are all living here and we all are related to each other in some kind of way, in which we're seeking a better life for everybody, not just ourselves, but our families and our communities. And so this is what we really want to build. And yes, we can't rely just on the legislature or our governor or our government, as Amy has warned us in a way, but we can work with them, and we could add certainly a lot more pressure, if you will, if we are a little bit more united that way. Because our elected officials are indeed the ones who are accountable to us, and we need to find ways to so that they can hear, again, that they work for us, and that's the reason why they're in their jobs. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to have these conversations to build, greater alliances and relationships with each other, so that we can call upon each other, especially when we need, especially that extra effort to make that point before our government officials. And yes, Amy, you folks are going to have a really tough job this year. I mean, dealing with the budget situation. But at the same time, we need to hear from you the fact that you are listening to us as well. And that's not what's happening right now. I mean, we're not getting any word, in some sense, that we seem to get any word from the governor down, to the offices in which you have your own colleagues that are telling, the people on the ground, that they feel they're hurt, and they hear their cries for assistance.
Thank you, Reverend. Amy, I think you're on stack next, and we are nearing 4:30. So perhaps after you go, we might then think, I would like to invite people to think of a few concrete ways we might work together, whether it be starting a listserv that different orgs are on, or just maybe we could take a few minutes just to brainstorm ways to build in concrete ways the conversation that has started here. So Amy, let's hear from you, and then let's maybe move towards there by way of wrapping up. Oh, actually, no, Nigel will go after you, and then we can do that. Sorry, Nigel.
I just wanted to mahalo everyone for this conversation, and I have to leave at 4:30 for another meeting, but I did want to say I don't want to be misconstrued. I am all about the pressure, and the community should be virtually and otherwise at the Capitol. It's your building, it's the people's building. And I do think it's our responsibility. Like we are responsible for public resources. And that's not insignificant. I just wanted to say that I haven't, the kind of change that we're talking about right now, I don't see that really coming spontaneously from the building. That was really like the message I was trying to get across, but not to say that it can't happen with movement. That's why we organize, right?
Thank you, Amy. And I'm going to call on Nigel and then also just refer the panelists to a question from Alex Miller in the Q&A in case we can, it's a large question. I'm not sure we can get to that adequately, but somebody might want to try and take a stab at that. So Nigel.
Yeah, just real fast, just wanted to say thank you again. And I think that's like the beauty of opportunities like this, and maybe even opportunities like COVID, is now we are working online. And we can meet each other that we often wouldn't. I mean, I've been meeting Amy and been sitting in some of the meetings with her and been able to learn some of the stuff she does. It's like kind of like putting together like a baby luau, you know who, if I know who to get kole from, I'm gonna call them. If I know who I get the pig from, I'm gonna call them. But like situations like this or opportunities like this allow us to identify within our little networks who's the people, right? If Puna is the ALU folks, the guys at the school, can we connect with her and get researchers on a farm or something, or that kind of stuff? So just something really nice out of spaces like this. Mahalo.
Thank you, Nigel. So I had suggested some concrete suggestions from you all. And then I also just want to direct attention to a question from Alex Miller. Those at UH has been proposed as a potential part of creating a thriving Hawaii free from dependence on tourism in America. If we want to make that a reality in an equitable way, we need to address problems that have been mentioned, like the climate crisis, indigenous liberation, and defunding the police military within our institution. How are your orgs working to do that? How are your organizations framing that discussion? So that's another question. We'll have that be our last one in case anyone wants to answer to that one. And Joshua, I see your hand is up, and then Shankar, you're on stack after that.
Mahalo. And I particularly want to point to indigenous liberation. Specifically, I am a middle school teacher. We definitely need more teachers. We need more teachers. And I think as we take a look at education and in the truth, we will have a greater understanding in the mainstream of what happened to the Hawaiian Kingdom and the reconciliation process that needs to happen with the Hawaiian people, Hawaiian nationals, and those like including myself that considers himself a Hawaiian Kingdom national, right? And I beg and I ask all of you friends, I know you all are allies because of intersectionality, and we all fight there, but I ask us to think about a future where we are independent of the United States of America again. And I know that starts, and I made it my commitment to start as a teacher to teach the truth. We need more teachers teaching the truth. And mahalo the question there. Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. Shankar.
I think part of what we should do is, I think we can all agree that there is a crisis. I mean, there's no debate about that. There's a pandemic. About 500,000 people just in the US are going to lose their lives because of COVID. So there's no question about it. but how we narrate that crisis is really important, because I think we can recognize where resources are. Like Jeff Bezos has added 80, I don't know what it is. I can't even, I don't even know, it's 80 billion, 80 million, I don't know what it's probably billion, right? Whatever it is, he's added some huge amount of money to his wealth. The 1%ers have gotten richer. So it's a crisis, there's scarcity, and yet some people are getting richer. You know, so what's going on with that? I think we need to really ask that question. And I mean, it's clearly not everybody's experiencing the scarcity. In fact, some people are experiencing abundance. And I think we really need to like think about that, because in other words, I think the way to think about it is that there are resources to have a more robust understanding of the public good. It's there. There is a crisis. In fact, the crisis requires us to think about, to have a more robust understanding of public good, because it's going to stop us from having a next crisis, or it's going to help us in the next crisis. So I don't think it's like we have a crisis and we cannot have a robust understanding of public good. It's not, that's not the way it works in my mind. It's the opposite. We have a crisis and we better do something about the public good. And so I think we need to really generate those stories and really insist on breaking that, because that's what we're going to hear from the people in power, right? Whether it's within UH, to go to Alex's question, or the ledge, or wherever, there's a crisis, what do you want me to do? So we don't have the money for this, that, or the other. But there are resources for the most vulnerable and the people who are hurting the most, and which will actually help us in this crisis and the crises to come. And we need to insist on that.
Thank you, Shankar. And I think that we are a little past our targeted time, so I want to turn things over to Ellen to close things out. And before doing so, I also just want us all to mahalo Ellen for being the vision behind this conversation and bringing everybody together. What I hope will just be the start of an ongoing conversation. So Ellen, thanks so much for your vision and all your hard work in making this event happen today. I think it was really productive and exciting to be part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. You know, I when I was making this panel or conversation, you know, I was thinking that the creation of tourism, after we had the plantations and then the military and all of these industries were really ramped up after the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And we want to think about militarism, you know, as this force, this economic force of the United States that projected itself to Hawaii, as well as to penetrate deeper and intervene into the Pacific and in Asia. And it is not a surprise to me, and it angers me, that it is the people from the Philippines, from Micronesia, that because of militarization, they have also become migrants to be in the low service worker positions and in this continued injustice. And so I see this moment of bringing together everybody as an opportunity for alliance, and that cannot happen until we talk deeply and honestly about where we are, what are we doing, and what do we think about each other, being neighbors to each other. I believe what Reverend Sam says about we need to make our legislature accountable to us. And that is important because they do manage our tax resources. The taxes we pay goes to them. And we need to have resources to come to the people that are in need. But at the same time, there are these other channels of movement and collaboration, and that is through being neighbors to one another, being community people, and bypassing waiting for the legislature to tell us go or no. You know what I mean? And I think that is an important legacy of Hawaiian history in terms of our labor movement, and in terms of just being people of the Pacific, and how, you know, we have to all learn to listen and relate to one another and somehow collaborate with one another in this time. So I think I want to thank everybody for joining. I think that we have a lot of resources in our community that we can piece together if we learn more about each other. And so Thank you all for joining us. And I really do hope that we stay in touch in informal networks and we can continue to prepare for future actions. So hopefully we will maybe start a conversation on email in the links, in the emails that we started to organize this panel. And maybe if there are actions coming up in the future, we can announce it to one another and then perhaps organize future meetings. So thank you everyone for joining and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody, all my fellow.
Mahalo, everyone.
And Ellen, thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.